Hey guys, Brian from Boas here. As you may know, I'm a bit of a specialist when it comes to reptiles, and I specifically focus on one type of snake, the boa constrictor. I do, however, have a single reptile in my collection that's not a boa constrictor, and it's an Indian python. This animal is quite a bit bigger than my biggest boas, and I want to show you this animal today. I'm going to go over my Indian python's care and husbandry, show you his enclosure, and discuss considerations you should make if you're thinking about acquiring a really big snake. First of all, what do we mean when we talk about giant snakes? Well, boa constrictors are obviously not really giant snakes, contrary to popular belief. By boa constrictors, I mean the different subspecies formerly classified as boa constrictor and recently reclassified as boa constrictor, boa imperator, and boa sigma, three separate species. So boa constrictors in this group are in the medium to extra large size range. And in my opinion, an animal from 3 to 6 feet is a medium-sized snake. A 6 to 9 foot snake is a large snake, and an extra large snake is somewhere from around 9 to about 13 feet. So the absolute largest boa constrictors would be in the extra large size range. In contrast, pythons of several species have been demonstrated to regularly exceed 20 feet in length, with the all-time record being 33 feet for a reticulated python. Of course, this 33-foot figure is somewhat controversial, and it may well be an exaggeration, just like a lot of the figures out there for snake size. But it's quite likely that the largest snakes ever are somewhere in the 25 to 28 foot range, which by no means is a small snake. That's still certainly a giant animal. This is my Indian python. He's in the 10 to 11 foot range, and I'm fairly confident that that's an accurate estimate. It's not uncommon for people to over-exaggerate the size of their snakes, but I wouldn't do that. If you've ever watched some of these python hunting shows where they hunt Burmese pythons in the Everglades, they always overestimate. For example, they'll show a snake that's maybe 6, 7 foot tops and claim it's 11 feet. But I'm pretty sure that this guy is an accurate 10 to 11 feet, and he weighs about 50 pounds, which is a pretty stout lift. You can see I'm getting pretty tired here. But take a look at the head of this guy. So I got this guy in 2006 at the East Bay Vivarium in Berkeley, and I actually traded some of my baby Argentine boas for him. And I was really excited because Indian pythons are quite rare and hard to find. They're actually closely related to Burmese pythons. They were once a subspecies of the same species, but they've recently been reclassified as two separate species. I've actually moved him into a Christmas tree tub. He was just a little too much snake for me to use my usual filming style. You can see he's actually hissing a little bit. Overall, this is a fairly docile snake. He's never bit me or, tried to attack me or anything like that. He's just not quite puppy dog tame because due to his size, I don't really handle him on a regular basis. But I wanted to give you a close-up of his head. You can see the size of the head of an animal this big, quite a bit bigger than boas heads. And I also want to show you his spurs. So he's got some pretty impressive spurs or vestigial limbs, quite a bit bigger than what I see in my boas. The Burmese pythons and Indian pythons are closely related species. The Burmese pythons are bigger overall, reaching lengths of up to 16 to 20 feet, whereas Indian pythons are a little smaller, usually in the 9 to 13 foot range as adults. The coloration of the Indian python is also lighter, more of kind of a mocha and caramel color, whereas the Burmese pythons have more black and darker brown. In addition, the Indian pythons have less distinct head markings. They're kind of more faded, whereas in a Burmese python there's a more well-formed and well-defined spear point on the top of the head. One point I want to make about having a really big snake like this is it's a lot more commitment and harder to care for and handle than a smaller snake, as you may have noticed. So when you go from a 6-foot snake to a 12-foot snake, the length might double, but the mass and the volume actually goes up by a factor of 8. So if a 6-foot snake weighs about 10 pounds, the 12-foot snake of the same girth and proportions would weigh about 80 pounds. And it's much harder to handle a snake of that size than the smaller snake. So this guy is definitely a lot more snake than any of my boas. The largest boa I've ever had was about 9 feet. And so you see this guy is quite a bit bigger than that. He's not aggressive, as I mentioned, but he's just not easy to handle. And really, for any snake bigger than about 8 feet, you should really have 2 people handling it, not just 1 person. So this is definitely something you should consider if you're thinking about getting one of these really big snakes. I'm actually surprised by how many people that I see that are working with like really big snakes, considerably bigger than this guy, such as reticulated pythons. And while they're certainly beautiful and impressive snakes, these retics can regularly get up to around 20 feet or even larger. And that's like twice the size of this guy, which is really kind of crazy to think about. And they have a super dwarf and a dwarf form of retics that don't get as big. But the problem is that a lot of the animals that have these bloodlines bred into them are not pure super dwarfs. So they can easily end up getting to be, in 14, 15 foot range if they have some of the regular large retic. They're not the pure dwarf form. So something you should really consider if you're thinking about getting a big snake. It might be handleable and easily to manage as a baby, but within 2 to 3 years, some of these animals can get to be over 10 feet, and they just, are very large commitment, much more so than a boa constrictor. Now I want to show you a look at the enclosure that I keep my Indian python in. So this is a Proline snake cage, and the dimensions are 8 feet long by 2.5 feet deep by 2 feet tall. It's made of plastic with a plexiglass front, and it actually comes in 2 halves. Each half is 4 feet, and it's kind of bolted in the center right here. I made a stand for it out of plywood. This is just 5/8 inch plywood it's got 6 legs, and the legs are made out of a 4x4 post that's 18 inches high. And it supports it okay. I have the extra ones in the middle just for extra support. So I went ahead and I opened the doors to the cage just to show you how the plexiglass doors fold down. And one issue with the cage, overall it's been a really good cage, but if I was going to build my own, I would use glass as a front just because the plexiglass gets kind of dinged up over time and it doesn't let the light through nearly as well as glass, and it's also a little harder to clean. So now I want to show you the inside of the cage, and one feature you'll notice is I use this fake rock background, and you can get this stuff. It comes on a roll. It's not inexpensive, but it's basically like this textured rubberized material that has the appearance of rock. And some people get like a 4 foot length of it, which just covers the back, but I got this roll, so actually I was able to cover the back and the sides, which is kind of cool. It gives it almost like a cave-like appearance. When I first got the cage about 10 years ago, I was going for a more naturalistic approach, but since then I've kind of simplified the enclosure a little more just to keep it easier to maintain and clean. And so you can see I have, as a substrate, I have corrugated cardboard. I was actually using a cypress mulch bedding, but it was really messy and quite dirty as well. And I find it's easier just to change the corrugated cardboard. You can see I have some cork bark in there, as well as just cardboard boxes. And with a snake this big, it's hard to find pieces of cork bark or a naturalistic hide that's big enough. So I just use these cardboard boxes, and I get a lot of them with shipments in the mail. So basically I just replace them about every week or so. And then you can see the heater is underneath this box, and it's actually called a pig blanket. It's just this big plastic heater that's used for warming farm animals. And I have it on a thermostat set to 92 degrees, and it's worked quite well. The snake usually just kind of chills out in these boxes. Doesn't like to be seen. You can see he's kind of poking out there. And then I have a big water dish on one end. This is just a crock style water dish. It's quite a bit bigger and more durable than what I use for my boa constrictors. But I've had this dish for many, many years, and it's held up quite nicely. I went ahead and I put my big guy back in his enclosure. Thought I'd get out a typical adult boa constrictor, just so you can see the contrast in the size and the handleability between the boa constrictor and the Indian python. This is a 5-year-old female Coups pastel Colombian boa that's almost reaching adult size. So last things I want to say about the Indian python, the husbandry is fairly straightforward. In general, they're not really picky animals. I feed my big guy about once a month. He gets either an adult chicken or a couple jumbo rats, and I kind of go back and forth just for variety. As far as breeding animals, these big guys like the worms and the retics and things like that, they're supposed to be relatively straightforward as far as getting them to breed and reproduce, but the practicalities of having these huge snakes and moving them from cage to cage and that kind of stuff is definitely a lot more challenging than with the boas. So I've never bred a large python like that before. I never intended to breed my Indian. He was just as a pet. But I can tell that it would be a serious commitment if you want to breed these big animals. You need really big cages. You need several people to manage them and move them around. So not something to go into lightly. I hope this video was helpful for you, and if you ever thought about getting a giant snake, it gave you some food for thought. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot me a line. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your boas and python.